Lieutenant Marcus Chen stepped off the transport shuttle and into Kepler Station for the first time. The massive space station floated in the void between stars, its metal corridors humming with alien voices and strange sounds. Marcus carried a single duffel bag over his shoulder and looked around with wide eyes. Everything here was new and different. This was humanity's first joint military training facility with the Galactic Defense Coalition. For the past 50 years, humans had been the newest members of the galaxy's biggest military alliance. Most other species had been part of the coalition for hundreds or even thousands of years. Humans were still learning how things worked. Marcus walked through the main corridor and saw aliens everywhere. Tall, crystal-like beings moved gracefully past him, their bodies making soft musical sounds with each step. These were the Veltar, and Marcus had studied them in his training. Their entire bodies were made of living crystal that could change shape and color. They were known throughout the galaxy as artists and philosophers. Near the wall, a group of large, scaled creatures stood talking in deep, rumbling voices. The Zephyrians looked like giant lizards that walked on two legs. They had sharp claws, rows of teeth, and eyes that seemed to see everything. Everyone knew they were some of the best warriors in the galaxy. Their homeworld was a harsh desert planet where only the strongest survived. Marcus also spotted several smaller beings with multiple arms and insect-like features. The Quill were famous for being incredibly smart. They could solve complex math problems in their heads and plan military strategies that no one else could understand. Their thin bodies moved in quick, jerky motions as they worked on tablets and computers. A young human officer approached Marcus. "You must be Lieutenant Chen. I'm Sergeant Rodriguez. Welcome to Kepler Station." Marcus saluted. "Thank you, Sergeant. I'm ready to start training." Rodriguez smiled but looked a little worried. "I'll be honest with you, Chen. It's not easy being human here. Most of these aliens have been fighting wars since before Earth even had cities. They think we're weak and inexperienced." "I understand, Sergeant. I'll do my best to prove them wrong. Good luck. Report to Commander Velthok in Training Bay 7. You're being assigned to Squad Nexus 7. It's an experimental mixed species unit." Marcus found his way to Training Bay 7 after getting lost twice. The station was much bigger than any building on Earth, and the alien writing on the signs was still hard for him to read. When he finally arrived, he saw 3 aliens waiting near a large table covered with weapons and equipment. The first was a Veltar whose crystal body sparkled with blue and silver colors. Her name was Thisara, according to his assignment papers. She was taller than Marcus and moved like she was dancing even when standing still. Her voice sounded like wind chimes when she spoke. The second alien was a massive Zephyrian named Krexthor. He was almost 7 feet tall with dark green scales and yellow eyes. Scars covered his arms and face, showing he had been in many battles. His claws tapped against the metal table as he looked at Marcus with obvious disappointment. The third was a Quill called Zixtel. She had 4 arms and large compound eyes that reflected light like mirrors. Her thin body was covered in what looked like natural armor, and she held a tablet in each of her hands while typing with incredible speed. "So, this is our human," Krexthor said in his deep voice. "Smaller than I expected." Thisara's crystal body chimed softly, which Marcus realized was her way of laughing. "Indeed. And so soft-looking. How does a creature without natural weapons or armor survive on its homeworld?" Zixtel looked up from her tablets. "According to my research, humans evolved on a relatively mild planet. No extreme temperatures, no toxic atmosphere, no dangerous predators. They are what we call garden world species." Marcus tried to stay calm, but he could feel his face getting red. "Earth isn't as safe as you think. We have wars, natural disasters, dangerous animals. Compared to our worlds, human, your planet is a vacation resort." Krexthor interrupted. "My people hunt creatures that breathe fire and have skin like armor. Thisara's species lives in crystal caves where the temperature changes can shatter stone. Zixtel's homeworld has gravity 3 times stronger than yours and storms that last for years." Before Marcus could respond, a tall Zephyrian in a commander's uniform entered the room. This was Commander Velthok, the head of training operations. His scales were darker than Krexthor's, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had fought in many wars. "Squad Nexus 7, attention," the commander said. "You are part of an important experiment. The Coalition wants to see if mixed species units can work together better than single-species squads. Each of you brings different strengths to the team." He looked at each squad member in turn. Thysera, your crystal manipulation and sonic abilities give you unique tactical options. Krexthor, your combat experience and natural weapons make you our close combat specialist. Zixtel, your analytical mind and strategic thinking will guide the squad's planning. Then his yellow eyes focused on Marcus. And Lieutenant Chen, you represent humanity's determination and adaptability. Marcus could tell that the commander was trying to be polite, but even he seemed to think humans were the weak link in the squad. Training begins tomorrow at 600 hours, Velthok continued. You will learn to work together, fight together, and think together. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and the Coalition needs soldiers who can handle anything. After the commander left, Marcus tried to make conversation with his new squadmates. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. I've studied your species and cultures, and I'm impressed by what each of you can do. Thysera's crystals chimed again. How nice. The human has read about us in books. Reading about something and living it are very different, Krexthor added. You cannot understand what it means to be a warrior by studying papers. Zixtel tilted her head. I am curious about human military preparation. What rituals do your people perform before combat training? Marcus wasn't sure what she meant. Rituals? Well, we usually do some warm-up exercises to prepare our bodies. Stretching, light cardio, that sort of thing. Stretching? Thysera asked, her crystals shifting to a confused purple color. You mean moving your limbs around? Yes, and some basic exercises to get the blood flowing and prevent injuries. The three aliens looked at each other, and Marcus could tell they were trying not to laugh. The human must perform his preparation dance for us tomorrow, Krexthor said with amusement. I am curious to see these warm-up exercises. Marcus felt embarrassed but tried to stay professional. They're just basic physical preparation. Every human soldier does them. Of course they do, Zixtel said, typing something on her tablet. I am adding this to my notes about human behavior patterns. Very interesting. As Marcus unpacked his gear in the squad's shared equipment room, he could hear his teammates talking in the corridor. They were speaking in their own languages, but he caught enough Coalition standard to understand they were discussing him. Words like primitive, weak, and liability came up several times. Marcus lay down on his narrow bunk that night and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would be his first real test as part of an alien military unit. He had trained hard on Earth and scored well in all his tests, but this was different. Here, he wasn't just representing himself. He was representing all of humanity. He thought about his family back on Earth, about the billions of people counting on soldiers like him to prove that humans belonged in the galaxy. Marcus closed his eyes and made a promise to himself. No matter how his squadmates treated him, no matter how hard the training became, he would not give up. He would show them what humans could do. Outside his small window, the stars looked the same as they did from Earth. But everything else was about to change. The alarm rang at 05:30 hours, giving Squad Nexus 7 30 minutes to get ready for their first training session. Marcus was already awake, having barely slept due to excitement and nerves. He quickly put on his training uniform and gathered his gear. In the squad's preparation area, Marcus began his daily routine. He started with some light stretching, reaching his arms above his head and twisting his torso from side to side. Then he dropped down and did 20 push-ups, followed by some jumping jacks to get his heart rate up. His alien squadmates watched with curious expressions. Thysera was preparing for training in her own way. She stood perfectly still while her crystal body began to vibrate. The vibrations created beautiful musical notes that filled the room with harmony. Her crystals changed from blue to gold to silver, as different frequencies flowed through her structure. This was how Veltar prepared their bodies for combat, by tuning their crystalline matrix to the perfect resonance. The Crystal Singer's preparation is always beautiful to witness, Krexthor commented as he began his own routine. The large Zephyrian started making aggressive postures, standing on his hind legs and roaring loudly. He showed his teeth, extended his claws, and made threatening gestures at invisible enemies. This was traditional Zephyrian combat preparation, intimidating opponents before the fight even began. Zixtel's preparation was completely different. She sat quietly with all four of her hands working on separate tablets. Her compound eyes moved rapidly as she calculated optimal muscle activation sequences, energy distribution patterns, and tactical probabilities. Her people believed that mental preparation was more important than physical preparation. Marcus continued his warm-up routine, moving into some basic calisthenics. He did sit-ups, lunges, and arm circles while his squad mates finished their preparations. "What exactly is the human doing?" Thaisara asked, her crystals chiming with amusement. "It appears to be some sort of ritual movement," Zixtel replied, looking up from her calculations. "Very primitive compared to our methods." Krexthor stopped his intimidating display and watched Marcus with interest. "Is this how all humans prepare for battle? By wiggling around?" Marcus felt his face turn red again. "It's called warming up. We're preparing our muscles and joints for physical activity. It helps prevent injuries and improves performance." "How strange," Thaisara said. "Your body requires these odd movements just to function properly?" "Feltar crystals are always ready for action. Zephyrian warriors are born ready to fight," Krexthor added proudly. "We do not need to perform dances before combat. The Quill prepare through mental calculation and strategic analysis," Zixtel said. "We find optimal solutions rather than relying on physical rituals." Marcus finished his warm-up routine and tried to ignore their comments. Different species, different methods. That's what makes this squad interesting, right? When they arrived at Training Bay 7, Commander Veltok was waiting with several other instructors. The training area was huge, with obstacle courses, combat simulators, and testing equipment everywhere. "Today we begin with basic skills assessment," the commander announced. "Each squad member will demonstrate their natural abilities in training." Thaisara went first. She moved to a section of the training area filled with metal targets and obstacles. With graceful movements she began to sing, but this wasn't normal singing. Her crystal body produced focused sonic waves that could cut through metal, shatter stone, or create force barriers. She destroyed targets with pinpoint accuracy, created walls of solid sound to block incoming projectiles, and even lifted heavy objects using sonic manipulation. The other aliens in the training base stopped what they were doing to watch. Thaisara's display was beautiful and deadly at the same time. Her crystal body sparkled like a rainbow as she moved, and the sounds she created were both music and weapons. "Impressive as always," Commander Velthok said. "Veltar's sonic manipulation is one of the most versatile abilities in the Coalition." Krexthor went next. He moved to the hand-to-hand combat area where practice dummies and weapons waited. The Zephyrian warrior was like a natural disaster. His claws tore through armor. His powerful legs could kick through walls, and his bite could crush steel. He moved with speed that seemed impossible for something so large, and his natural armor deflected most attacks. Within minutes, Krexthor had destroyed every practice dummy in the area. The other aliens nodded with respect. Everyone knew that Zephyrian warriors were among the most feared fighters in the galaxy. Zixtel's turn was different. She went to the strategic planning station where complex battle scenarios played out on multiple screens. Her four hands worked on different control panels while her compound eyes tracked dozens of moving pieces. She could predict enemy movements, calculate resource allocation, and plan tactical responses faster than any computer. In one test scenario, she managed a fleet of 50 ships against an enemy force twice that size. Through clever positioning, resource management, and tactical timing, she achieved total victory with minimal losses. Other Quill instructors made approving clicking sounds with their mandibles. Finally, it was Marcus's turn. He looked at the different testing areas and felt overwhelmed. He couldn't manipulate sound waves like Thaisara. He wasn't a natural predator like Krexthor, and he couldn't calculate complex strategies like Zixtel. "What would you like to demonstrate, Lieutenant Chen?" Commander Velthok asked. Marcus walked to the basic combat area. "I'll show you standard human military training, sir." He began with the obstacle course, climbing over walls, crawling under barriers, and jumping across gaps. His performance was solid but not spectacular. Next, he moved to the weapons range and fired various Coalition standard weapons. Again, his accuracy was good but nothing amazing. For hand-to-hand combat, Marcus sparred against a training android set to average difficulty. He used techniques he had learned in military training: strikes, blocks, grapples, and throws. He won the match, but it took effort and strategy, rather than overwhelming natural ability. When he finished, there was polite applause from the instructors, but Marcus could tell they weren't impressed. "Adequate performance," Commander Velthok said. "Human training methods produce competent soldiers." Marcus heard Thaisara's crystals chiming softly behind him. She was talking to Krexthor in low tones. "The human's abilities seem so limited. No natural weapons, no special senses, no unique capabilities. Perhaps this experiment is flawed, Krexthor replied. How can such a weak species contribute to a squad with real warriors? Zixtel was typing on her tablet again. My calculation suggests that the human will be the limiting factor in this unit's performance. We may need to adjust our strategies to compensate for his physical limitations. The rest of the training session involved team exercises. Squad Nexus 7 worked together on communication drills, tactical planning, and coordination exercises. Marcus tried his best, but it was clear that his squad mates were not confident in his abilities. During combat simulation training, the squad faced virtual enemies in different scenarios. Thesara's sonic abilities could handle multiple targets at once. Krexthor could tear through enemy lines like a one-warrior army. Zixtel could predict enemy movements and coordinate perfect counterattacks. Marcus provided supporting fire and tried to stay out of the way, but several times his squad mates had to cover for him when he couldn't keep up with their superhuman abilities. After training ended, the squad returned to their preparation area. Marcus immediately began his cool-down routine, more stretching and light exercises to help his muscles recover. His squad mates watched again with the same amused expressions. The human performs his ritual dance again, Thesara observed. Does he do this after every activity? It seems to be a compulsive behavior, Zixtel said, making notes on her tablet. Perhaps humans require constant physical maintenance to remain functional. Krexthor shook his head. On my homeworld, we have creatures that must constantly groom themselves or they become sick. Perhaps humans are similar. Marcus tried to ignore their comments, but it was getting harder. Every day, his warm-up and cool-down routines became sources of entertainment for his squad mates. They would make jokes about his preparation dances and compare them to the behaviors of primitive animals from their homeworlds. The worst part was that Marcus could tell they weren't being cruel on purpose. They genuinely saw him as a lesser being, something weak and primitive that needed special care to survive in their advanced military environment. As the days passed, the gap between Marcus and his squad mates seemed to grow larger. Their natural abilities made every exercise easier for them, while Marcus had to work twice as hard to achieve half the results. But Marcus didn't give up. Every morning he continued his warm-up routine. Every evening he did his cool-down exercises. And every day he pushed himself to be better, even as his alien squad mates continued to see him as nothing more than a weak human playing soldier in a galaxy of real warriors. 2 weeks into training, Squad Nexus 7 faced their most challenging simulation yet. The scenario was a hostage rescue mission on a hostile space station, multiple enemy forces, innocent civilians to protect, and a time limit that made every second count. Marcus had been doing better in recent training sessions, but he could still feel the gap between himself and his squad mates. While they performed incredible feats with their natural abilities, he had to rely on careful planning, good aim, and determination. Remember the plan, Zixtel said as they prepared to enter the simulation chamber. Thesara will use sonic barriers to protect the civilians. Krexthor will handle heavy combat in the main corridors. I will coordinate from the tactical position. And Marcus? She paused, looking at her tablet. Marcus will provide support and watch for any enemies we miss. It wasn't exactly a heroic role, but Marcus nodded. Understood. I'll do my part. The simulation began, and immediately everything went wrong. The enemy AI had been programmed to adapt to each squad member's abilities. As soon as Thesara created her first sonic barrier, the enemies switched to sound-dampening weapons that reduced her effectiveness. When Krexthor charged into combat, they used energy nets designed specifically to slow down large, aggressive opponents. Worst of all, when Zixtel tried to hack into the station's computer systems for tactical information, she discovered that the enemy had prepared counter-algorithms that turned her own calculations against her. They know our abilities too well, Thesara said, her crystal body flickering with frustrated colors. This simulation was designed to counter everything we can do. Marcus tried to help by providing covering fire for Krexthor, but the Zephyrian warrior was already overwhelmed by enemies specifically designed to fight his species. Energy nets wrapped around his legs and sonic disruptors confused his natural senses. I cannot move effectively, Krexthor growled. These weapons are too specialized. Zixtel was having similar problems. Every tactical solution she calculated was immediately countered by enemy responses. It was like fighting an opponent who could read her mind. "The enemy AI is learning faster than I can adapt," she reported. "We need a new approach." Marcus looked around the chaotic battlefield. His squad mates were struggling against enemies designed to counter their specific abilities. But the simulation hadn't adapted to human tactics because nobody expected humans to contribute significantly. "I have an idea," Marcus said. "What if I try a direct assault while they're focused on countering your abilities?" Krexthor looked at him with disbelief. "Human, if I cannot handle direct combat, how do you expect to succeed? Because they're not prepared for human tactics. They're countering crystal manipulation, Zephyrian combat patterns, and quill calculations. They might not know how to handle basic human military training." Before anyone could stop him, Marcus moved toward the main enemy position. He used simple tactics, rolling behind cover, suppressing fire, flanking movements. Nothing sophisticated, but nothing the enemy AI had prepared for either. For a brief moment it seemed like the plan might work. Marcus advanced further than any of his squad mates had managed, and the enemy responses were slower and less coordinated. But then the AI adapted to him too. Suddenly, enemies swarmed his position from all directions. Without superhuman abilities to fall back on, Marcus was quickly overwhelmed. The simulation ended in complete failure. All civilians were lost. The station was destroyed, and Squad Nexus 7 had achieved none of their objectives. In the debriefing room, Commander Velthok reviewed their performance with obvious disappointment. "This was the worst performance I have seen from any mixed-species squad," he said bluntly. "The enemy AI was designed to be challenging, but you failed at every objective." Thisara's crystals had turned a dull gray color that indicated shame among her people. "We were not prepared for such adaptive opposition." "Preparation is not the issue," Krexthor said angrily. "The issue is that we are trying to work with a species that cannot contribute meaningfully to combat operations." All eyes turned to Marcus. He felt his face burning with embarrassment and anger. "Every decision we made had to account for the humans' limitations," Krexthor continued. "We cannot use our full abilities because we must protect the weak link in our squad." "That's not fair," Marcus started to protest. "Is it not?" Zixtel interrupted, consulting her tablet. "My analysis shows that 73% of our tactical failures were caused by the need to compensate for human physical and cognitive limitations. We cannot perform at our peak when we must constantly adjust for a species that evolved on a safe, easy world." Commander Velthok nodded grimly. "Perhaps the humans should consider a transfer to logistics or engineering. Combat requires capabilities that your species simply does not possess." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. For 2 weeks he had worked harder than ever before in his life. He had pushed himself to his limits and beyond, trying to prove that humans belonged among the galaxy's warriors, and now he was being told to give up and accept a support role. "Sir, if you give me another chance—" "Lieutenant Chen," the commander interrupted, "this is not about effort or determination. This is about reality. Humans are simply not built for this kind of work. There is no shame in accepting your species' limitations." The debriefing ended, and Marcus's squad mates filed out of the room without speaking to him. He could see the disappointment and frustration in their body language. They had been excited about working in an experimental mixed-species unit. But instead they got stuck with a human who couldn't keep up. Marcus sat alone in the empty debriefing room for several minutes, staring at the tactical display that showed their failed mission. Every mistake was highlighted in red, and most of them seemed to trace back to his involvement. Maybe they were right. Maybe humans weren't ready for this level of military cooperation. Maybe he should accept a transfer to a safer position and let real warriors handle the dangerous work. That evening, Marcus skipped dinner and went straight to Training Bay 7. The facility was mostly empty since regular training hours had ended. He needed to work out his frustrations and he needed to think about his future. He started with his usual warm-up routine, but this time it felt different. Instead of preparing for training with his squad, he was exercising alone, processing the reality that he might not belong here. Marcus pushed himself harder than usual. More push-ups, longer runs on the treadmill, heavier weights in the strength training area. His body was already tired from the day's failed simulation, but he didn't care. He needed to do something that felt like progress. As he exercised, Marcus thought about his family on Earth. His parents had been so proud when he was selected for the Coalition training program. His younger sister had bragged to all her friends that her brother was going to be a space soldier. The entire human population was counting on soldiers like him to prove that humanity deserved respect in the galaxy. What would he tell them if he came home with a logistics assignment? How could he explain that humans were just too weak, too limited, too primitive to fight alongside real warriors? The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Not angry at his squad mates. They had legitimate concerns about his abilities. Not angry at Commander Velthok. The Zephyrian was just being realistic about human limitations. Marcus was angry at himself for not being good enough, and angry at humanity for not evolving on a world that would have made them stronger. He moved to the pull-up station and began doing repetitions, each one powered by frustration and disappointment. Earth gravity was lighter than most Coalition worlds, so humans were considered weak by galactic standards. Human reflexes were slower than most species, human senses were less acute, and human natural weapons were practically non-existent. Marcus was so lost in his angry thoughts that he didn't notice when 3 familiar figures entered the training bay. Squad Nexus 7 had returned to collect some equipment they had forgotten earlier. Thisara, Krexthor, and Zixtel stood near the entrance, watching Marcus go through his exercise routine. To them, he looked like he was performing the same silly rituals they had been mocking for 2 weeks. Even in failure, the human performs his dance, Thisara said, her crystals chiming with what sounded like pity. Marcus heard the comment, but he was too emotionally exhausted to respond. He just continued his workout, trying to work through his feelings of disappointment and inadequacy. He moved to a section of the training bay where structural support beams were exposed. The beams were thick metal poles that helped support the station's framework against the pressure of space. Marcus had often used similar structures for stretching and pull-ups during his training on Earth. Still lost in his thoughts about failure and human weakness, Marcus grabbed onto one of the support beams to steady himself for a final stretching routine. Marcus gripped the support beam with his right hand and pulled his left knee up toward his chest, rotating his torso for a deeper stretch. It was a basic movement he had done thousands of times before. Nothing special. Just a way to work out the tension in his lower back and hip muscles. The beam felt solid in his hand. Exactly what he expected from a piece of station infrastructure. He adjusted his grip slightly and leaned into the stretch, trying to work out the knots of stress and disappointment that had built up in his muscles throughout the day. That's when he heard the first groan. It was a low, metallic sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the station's structure. Marcus paused his stretching routine and looked around, wondering if there was some kind of mechanical problem. Space stations were complex machines, and strange noises usually meant something needed repair. The groaning sound came again, louder this time, and Marcus realized it was coming from directly beneath his hand. He looked down at the support beam he was holding and felt a chill of confusion run through his body. The thick metal pole, which should have been perfectly straight, now had a slight curve to it. Right where his hand gripped the beam, the metal had begun to bend. That's not possible, Marcus whispered to himself. But even as he said it, the beam continued to groan and bend under his grip. Marcus wasn't squeezing hard. He was just holding on for balance during his stretching routine. The same gentle pressure he might use to hold a railing or a tree branch, except this wasn't a railing or a tree branch. This was a structural support beam designed to hold up a space station against the vacuum of space. His alien squad mates had been watching from near the entrance, expecting to see another display of primitive human exercise rituals. But their casual mockery died in their throats as they witnessed something impossible. Thisara's crystal body stopped chiming entirely. The musical tones that constantly flowed through her structure went silent for the first time since Marcus had met her. Her crystals shifted to a pale, colorless state that indicated shock and confusion among her people. Krexthor, the proud warrior who had fought battles across a dozen worlds, took an involuntary step backward. His yellow eyes widened and his scales began shifting to the pale green coloration that meant fear in Zephyrian body language. His claws extended unconsciously, a defensive response he couldn't control. Zixtel's compound eyes reflected the light like mirrors as she stared at the impossible scene. All 4 of her hands had stopped moving, leaving her tablets forgotten. Her analytical mind was trying to process what she was seeing, but the data didn't make sense according to everything she knew about physics and materials science. Marcus was still lost in his own thoughts, completely unaware of what was happening. The day's failures had left him emotionally drained, and he was going through his stretching routine on autopilot. He pulled his knee higher and rotated his torso further, using the beam for leverage exactly like he would use any piece of exercise equipment. The groaning became louder and more urgent. The beam was bending more dramatically now, the thick metal warping like soft clay under Marcus's casual grip. The curve was becoming pronounced and stress fractures were beginning to appear in the station's wall, where the beam connected to the main structure. It was Zixtel who broke the silence first. Her voice came out as a terrified chittering sound that barely resembled speech. What is he doing? The sound of her voice finally penetrated Marcus's distracted thoughts. He looked up and saw his 3 squad mates staring at him with expressions of absolute terror. They looked like they had seen a ghost or something much worse. What's wrong? Marcus asked, genuinely confused by their reactions. Krexthor tried to speak but only managed a hoarse whisper. The beam. Look at the beam. Marcus looked down at his hand and for the first time really saw what was happening. The support beam, a solid piece of durasteel designed to withstand the pressure differentials of space, was bent at nearly a 45-degree angle. Right where his hand gripped it, the metal had been molded like putty. Oh no, Marcus said, releasing his grip immediately. I didn't mean to, but the damage was already done. The beam held its new shape, permanently warped by forces that should have been impossible for any biological creature to produce. The stress fractures in the wall were still spreading, making small cracking sounds as the station's structure adjusted to the damaged support. Marcus stepped away from the beam, his mind racing to understand what had just happened. I was just stretching. I wasn't even trying to. I didn't know I could. The silence that followed was deafening. His squad mates stared at him like he had suddenly revealed himself to be some kind of monster. The casual contempt and amusement they had shown for weeks was replaced by something Marcus had never seen in their eyes before. Fear. Krexthor was the first to find his voice, though it came out weak and shaky. What are you? I'm just human, Marcus stammered. I don't understand what happened. I was just doing normal stretches. Normal? Thisara's crystal voice was barely a whisper. You call this normal? Zixtel was frantically working on her tablets again, but her movements were jerky and panicked rather than her usual smooth efficiency. I need to calculate the force required to bend a durasteel beam of that thickness. The numbers. They don't make sense. Within minutes, her calculations were complete. The results appeared on her tablet screen in bright red text that indicated critical data. According to my analysis, Zixtel said in a voice that shook with disbelief, bending that beam would require approximately 3.2 tons of focused pressure, applied at exactly the right angle. The metallurgical properties of durasteel make it resistant to deformation up to forces that would crush most known species. She looked up at Marcus with her compound eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and awe. But you weren't applying 3.2 tons of pressure. Your heart rate was barely elevated. Your muscle tension was minimal. You were treating a structural support beam like exercise equipment. The implications of her words sank in slowly. Marcus had been casually gripping the beam with the same effort he might use to hold a rope during stretching. But that casual human grip had generated enough force to permanently deform industrial-grade metal. This is impossible, Krexthor said, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence was right in front of them. A twisted piece of metal that told a story none of them wanted to believe. Thisara's crystals were cycling through colors rapidly, a sign of extreme emotional distress among her people. We have been mocking the human's preparation rituals for weeks. But if this is what he does accidentally during casual exercise, she couldn't finish the sentence. None of them could. For 2 weeks, they had watched Marcus go through his primitive warm-up routines and laughed at the silly human performing his preparation dances. But those weren't primitive rituals. They were a species of Deathworlders preparing their impossibly dense muscle fibers and reinforced skeletal structure for combat. Marcus was still staring at the bent beam, trying to process what had happened. I really didn't mean to break anything. On Earth, I use tree branches and playground equipment for stretching all the time, and nothing like this ever. He stopped mid-sentence as another realization hit him. Tree branches and playground equipment on Earth weren't made of durasteel. They were made of wood and regular steel, materials that were much softer, and more flexible than Coalition military-grade construction materials. Marcus had been unconsciously treating the space station structural supports the same way he would treat exercise equipment on his homeworld. The problem was that human exercise equipment was designed to handle human strength levels, while Coalition infrastructure was designed to handle the relatively gentle forces produced by most galactic species. "I need to report this to Commander Velthok," Zixtel said, still typing frantically on her tablets. "The implications for human military integration, for station safety, for everything we thought we knew about Deathworld species." "Wait," Marcus said quickly. "Please don't report this yet. I need to understand what happened before everyone starts thinking humans are dangerous." But it was too late for that. His squad mates were already thinking exactly that. They had spent weeks viewing him as the weak link in their squad, a primitive creature from an easy world who needed protection and accommodation. Now, they realized they had been living and training alongside a being who could accidentally destroy their living environment while doing casual stretches. The revelation changed everything. Marcus wasn't the weak one in Squad Nexus 7. He wasn't even the strong one. He was something else entirely. A creature whose casual physical movements generated forces that could reshape metal and crack walls, and he hadn't even been trying. The news spread through Kepler Station faster than Marcus thought possible. By the next morning, everyone from maintenance workers to senior officers seemed to know about the bent support beam. He could tell by the way conversations stopped when he walked into a room, and how other species gave him extra space in the corridors. Marcus had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what it meant to be human in a galaxy that had completely misunderstood his species. When he arrived at training, Bay 7 for the morning session, he found a crowd of alien engineers and scientists examining the damaged beam. They had brought scanning equipment, measuring devices, and stress analysis computers. The bent metal had become the subject of intense scientific study. "Fascinating," one of the Quill engineers was saying. "The deformation pattern suggests a grip strength that exceeds our theoretical models for biological creatures." A Veltar scientist was running sonic scans along the beam's surface. "The crystalline structure of the metal has been permanently altered. This level of force application should have required industrial machinery." Marcus tried to slip past the crowd unnoticed, but Commander Velthok spotted him immediately. "Lieutenant Chen, report to my office immediately." The walk to the commander's office felt like the longest journey of Marcus's life. Other aliens in the corridors stepped aside to let him pass, and he could hear whispered conversations in languages he didn't understand. Words like Deathworlder and dangerous came up repeatedly. Commander Velthok's office was larger than Marcus expected, with windows looking out at the stars and walls covered with military decorations from dozens of different worlds. The Zephyrian commander sat behind a desk that looked small compared to his massive frame. "Sit down, Lieutenant." Marcus sat in the chair across from the desk, trying to read the commander's expression. Velthok's yellow eyes were unreadable, and his scales showed no clear emotional coloration. "The engineering report confirms what your squad mates witnessed," the commander began. "You bent a structural support beam using only your grip strength during what you described as casual stretching." "Yes, sir. But I didn't mean to—" Velthok held up a clawed hand to stop him. "The engineers estimate that reproducing your feat would require approximately 3,200 kilograms of applied force. That is more than most industrial equipment can generate." Marcus felt his heart sinking. "Sir, if you're concerned about station safety, I can request transfer to a facility better equipped to handle—" "Lieutenant Chen," the commander interrupted. "You misunderstand the situation entirely." Velthok stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "For 50 years, the Coalition has viewed humanity as a minor species. Weak, primitive, barely capable of contributing to galactic civilization. We assigned humans to support roles in safe positions because we believed your species lacked the physical capabilities for serious military service." He turned back to face Marcus. "It appears we were catastrophically wrong." The commander activated a holographic display that showed various data files and reports. "Since yesterday's incident, our xenobiology teams have been reviewing everything we know about human physiology. The results are concerning." Images of Earth appeared on the display. Vast oceans, towering mountains, dense forests, and sprawling cities. We always knew Earth was a high-gravity world compared to most coalition planets, but we failed to understand what that meant for human development. New images showed comparative data between species. Most coalition worlds have gravity between 0.6 and 0.9 standard units. Earth has 1.0 gravity, which we considered only slightly above average, but when combined with your planet's atmospheric pressure, seasonal variations, and geological activity, the display showed muscular and skeletal comparisons between different species. Human bone density was nearly twice that of most coalition races. Human muscle fiber density was even more extreme. Your species evolved under conditions that would be considered harsh by galactic standards, Velthok continued. What you call normal human strength is the result of millions of years of adaptation to a world that most species would classify as dangerously hostile. Marcus stared at the data in shock. But Earth isn't that dangerous. We have cities, farms, peaceful areas. Lieutenant, your peaceful planet has weather systems that regularly produce winds capable of destroying buildings. Your safe cities are built to withstand earthquakes that would devastate most coalition worlds. Your recreational activities include climbing mountains that would be impassable to most species. The implications were staggering. Humans hadn't evolved on an easy world at all. They had evolved on a death world and then made it seem easy through technology and adaptation. Sir, what does this mean for human integration into the coalition? Velthok's scales shifted to a dark blue color that indicated serious contemplation. It means everything we thought we knew about your species was wrong. It means that when humans perform basic military training, you are actually demonstrating capabilities that exceed most of our elite units. A communication alert interrupted their conversation. Sir, came a voice through the comm system. Squad Nexus 7 is requesting permission to speak with Lieutenant Chen. Send them in, Velthok replied. The door opened, and Thaisara, Krexthor, and Zixtel entered the office. Their body language was completely different from how Marcus had ever seen them before. Thaisara's crystals were dim and respectful. Krexthor's head was lowered in what Marcus recognized as a gesture of acknowledgement among Zephyrian warriors. Zixtel approached with her compound eyes focused downward. Commander? Thaisara spoke first, her crystal voice subdued. We wish to formally apologize to Lieutenant Chen for our behavior over the past weeks. Krexthor stepped forward. We mocked what we thought were primitive rituals, not understanding that we were witnessing a death world species preparing for combat. The dishonor is ours. Zixtel activated one of her tablets. My analysis of human military doctrine now makes perfect sense. What we interpreted as basic training is actually advanced conditioning for beings whose baseline capabilities exceed most coalition standards. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sudden change in his squad mates' attitudes. You don't need to apologize. You didn't know and neither did I. That is exactly why we must apologize, Thaisara replied. A warrior should recognize strength in all its forms. We failed to see the power you demonstrated every day. Commander Velthok watched the exchange with interest. Squad Nexus 7, you have a new mission. You will participate in advanced training scenarios designed to properly utilize human capabilities. Lieutenant Chen will no longer be considered the support member of your unit. What will my role be? Marcus asked. Heavy assault specialist, the commander replied. Your casual grip strength exceeds our powered armor capabilities. Your species' baseline endurance surpasses most coalition elite units. And your training in what you call basic combat techniques represents advanced martial skills by our standards. Krexthor looked at Marcus with something approaching awe. Human, when you grabbed that beam last night, was that truly accidental? Completely, Marcus replied. I was just stretching. I had no idea I could bend metal. Then what could you do if you were actually trying? Zixtel asked, her compound eyes wide with curiosity and concern. It was a question that nobody wanted to test directly, but the implications were clear. If humans could accidentally damage station infrastructure during casual exercise, their combat potential was beyond anything the Coalition had previously encountered. Over the following days, everything changed for Squad Nexus 7 and for human integration into Coalition military operations. New training protocols were developed specifically for human physiology. Equipment standards were revised to account for human strength levels. Military doctrine was rewritten to properly utilize Deathworld species capabilities. Marcus found himself at the center of a galactic revelation about human nature. What his species had always considered normal Surviving on a high-gravity world with extreme weather, dangerous wildlife, and geological instability was actually an extraordinary feat of evolutionary adaptation. His daily warm-up routine, which had been mocked as primitive ritual, was now observed by xenobiologists as a demonstration of controlled force application that most species couldn't replicate with mechanical assistance. Squad. Nexus 7's next simulation was very different from their previous disaster. This time, the enemy AI was programmed to account for human capabilities. Marcus wasn't the weak link who needed protection. He was the heavy assault specialist who could tear through enemy positions that would stop other coalition forces. Thysera used her sonic abilities to create tactical advantages. Krexthor applied his combat experience and natural weapons for precision strikes. Zixtel coordinated their movements with mathematical precision. And Marcus did what humans do. He adapted, endured, and applied overwhelming force when necessary. The simulation ended in complete success. Every objective was achieved, and the squad worked together with a harmony they had never experienced before. After the exercise, as the squad prepared to leave the training bay, Marcus began his usual cool-down routine. But this time his squad mates didn't mock or ignore his exercise. Thank you for watching, and comment for next.